She said I shouldn't come in, but then she opened the door in a towel. It was an ordinary evening, the kind where the city hums softly in the background and a fading light paints the streets in warm amber. I was heading back from the corner store, juggling a bag of groceries and the usual clutter of thoughts that seemed to follow me everywhere. The hallway of my apartment building smelled faintly of cleaning solution mixed with the dry, dusty scent of the old carpet, nothing extraordinary, but comforting in its own way. Then I heard it, a sudden, startled sound from the apartment next to mine. A muffled thump followed by the faint shuffle of bare feet. Curious, I paused mid-step, heart skipping slightly. Before I could knock or call out, the door swung open. She stood there. My neighbor, older, undeniably graceful, someone whose presence always seemed to fill a room without trying. And in that moment, she was wrapped in nothing but a towel. The sight should have been shocking, but somehow it wasn't. It was real, human, disarmingly vulnerable. The towel clung loosely to her form, the soft fabric barely hiding the contours of her body, and I caught a brief, fleeting scent of her shampoo, floral, warm, inviting. Her eyes widened, catching me mid-step, and for a heartbeat neither of us moved. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice firm but not unkind, carrying that subtle undertone of embarrassment that made her almost radiant. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, suddenly aware of how loud the bag of groceries felt in my hand, how the echo of our shared space made my heart pound. She glanced at the towel, at the groceries in my hands, and then back at me. There was a hesitation in her posture, a flicker of amusement hidden behind the initial shock. For a fleeting second, I felt the magnetic push and pull of curiosity and restraint, the very first spark of a connection I didn't yet understand. I cleared my throat awkwardly. I didn't mean to," my words faltered, but she didn't step back. Instead, she exhaled softly, a quiet acknowledgement that this moment, though unexpected, was not entirely unwelcome. And just like that, a door had opened, literally and metaphorically. In the warmth of that hallway, between the echo of our breaths and the soft rustle of her towel, something unspoken had begun. Tension, curiosity, and an inexplicable pull toward her lingered in the air, heavier than the groceries in my hands. That evening marked the start of something I couldn't yet name. Something that would grow slowly, quietly, in the spaces between words, glances, and the subtle brush of presence. Something that would change both of us in ways I hadn't imagined, all beginning with a door, a towel, and the words she almost regretted saying, "You shouldn't let me in." The hallway felt smaller after that first encounter, even though it was the same as always. Somehow, the memory of her standing in the doorway in nothing but a towel made every corner, every echo, sharper, more immediate. I found myself thinking about her smile, the one that had flickered briefly after her initial embarrassment, and the quiet steadiness in her eyes that suggested a strength behind the vulnerability. Later that evening, I couldn't stop replaying the encounter in my head. The way her hand had lingered on the doorframe, the faint warmth radiating from her skin, the way her hair fell in damp, soft strands across her forehead. I knew it was absurd, a simple neighborly interaction, yet something about it made my pulse quicken. The next day, I bumped into her again in the hallway. She was dressed casually, a loose sweater over jeans, hair tucked behind her ears. Our eyes met, and there was that same flicker, a mix of caution, curiosity, and something unspoken that neither of us dared to name. "You're out early," I said, my voice betraying more nervousness than I intended. She smirked lightly, a playful glint in her eyes that made my chest tighten. "I like to think I'm productive," she replied, tilting her head just enough that a stray lock of hair brushed her cheek. It was such a small gesture, but it made me suddenly aware of the space between us, of how close we were standing. The scent of her perfume, warm, faintly floral, drifted toward me, and I realized I could smell her even from just a few steps away. Her eyes flicked down at the groceries in my hands, and then back to my face. Our fingers brushed momentarily as I handed her a stray piece of mail she had dropped. The touch was brief, almost accidental, yet it sent a subtle jolt through me. I could feel the warmth of her skin lingering, like a quiet imprint that refused to fade. "I didn't mean to startle you yesterday," she said softly, her tone more sincere than teasing. There was a vulnerability there, a crack in the carefully maintained composure she always seemed to carry. I nodded, fumbling for words, aware of how ordinary this conversation should have felt, yet charged with unspoken tension. We both laughed quietly at some awkward comment I made, the sound echoing softly in the hallway. It was a shared moment, small and fleeting, yet it carried the weight of something more. The embarrassment, the laughter, the lingering touches, they were all threads weaving us closer together, slowly, deliberately, in a way neither of us could fully control. By the time we parted ways, a subtle shift had occurred. The tension that had seemed so sharp the day before had softened into a quiet anticipation, a delicate awareness of one another. And I knew, even then, that this wasn't just neighborly courtesy. Something deeper, something that neither of us wanted to name just yet, was beginning to take root. After that first awkward exchange, our encounters became almost unavoidable. Apartment buildings have a way of shrinking the world, of forcing paths to cross when you least expect it. I began noticing the small ways she occupied shared spaces, the soft hum of her music drifting into the hallway, the rhythmic clack of her heels on the old linoleum floors, the faint scent of her coffee brewing in the morning. Each detail made her presence linger longer in my thoughts than it should have. We started nodding politely, exchanging brief comments in the elevator or as we passed each other on the stairwell. At first, the conversations were strictly functional: "Good morning, did you find the store okay?" But even these simple exchanges carried a weight neither of us could fully name. Her gaze often lingered a second longer than necessary, and I found myself catching little hints of warmth behind her poised exterior. One evening, she was carrying a stack of laundry down the hall. I offered to help, and our hands brushed as I took a bag from her. The contact was fleeting, almost accidental, yet it ignited something quiet and persistent in my chest. Her skin was warm and soft, and the subtle scent of her laundry detergent, clean, comforting, faintly sweet, clung to the air around her. I tried to act casual, but my pulse betrayed me, thudding loudly against my ribs as if insisting I notice every little detail. We paused for a moment, standing closer than necessary. Her eyes met mine, and I could feel a hesitation there, a question she didn't voice. It mirrored my own. Neither of us wanted to overstep, yet the magnetic pull of curiosity and subtle desire made it impossible to retreat entirely. I noticed the slight tilt of her head, the curve of her smile that suggested both amusement and unspoken awareness of our growing tension. In those moments, silence became a language of its own. The soft shuffle of our feet, the gentle exhale when she adjusted the weight of a laundry bag, even the ambient hum of the building, all of it seemed amplified, charged with the quiet electricity between us. Each brush of skin, each lingering glance, communicated more than words ever could. By the time we set the laundry down and parted ways, there was a subtle shift. A sense of familiarity had begun to root itself between us, delicate yet undeniable. The tension had softened into something warmer, more intimate, a quiet anticipation that seemed to follow me down the hall long after she had disappeared behind her door. In these everyday encounters, the line between neighborly politeness and something far more personal had begun to blur. And though neither of us dared to name it yet, the slow, deliberate pull toward each other was unmistakable, a gentle current growing stronger with every shared glance, every fleeting touch, every silent acknowledgement of the space we were beginning to occupy in one another's lives. The rain started as a soft drizzle, barely enough to soak the streets, but enough to make the evening feel intimate, quiet, and heavy with possibility. I had just stepped out to grab something I forgot, only to find myself trapped under the awning outside her door, the droplets tapping gently against the roof above me. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to knock or retreat. The memory of our previous encounters, the towel, the lingering glances, the subtle brush of hands, nudged me forward. When I knocked, the door opened almost immediately. She appeared in a loose, oversized sweater, damp hair tucked behind her ears. The warmth of her apartment spilled into the hallway, and I was instantly aware of the subtle scent of her home, a combination of coffee, soft vanilla, and something uniquely her. She didn't say a word, simply motioning for me to come in, and I stepped inside, leaving the rain behind. The apartment was cozy, softly lit, every corner infused with the quiet presence of her life. She handed me a towel to dry off, and when our hands touched, the warmth of her skin pressed against mine, sending a subtle shiver down my spine. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The space between us was charged with something unspoken, an awareness of proximity, of comfort, of quiet attraction restrained by hesitation. We settled into the living room with mugs of steaming coffee, the aroma mingling with the faint scent of her perfume. She spoke first, her voice softer than usual, almost hesitant, sharing a glimpse of her loneliness and the weight of experiences I hadn't known she carried. There was a tremor in her words, a vulnerability that made her seem both stronger and more fragile at the same time. I listened, heart quietly tightening, feeling the depth of connection form between us. I found myself speaking too, sharing things I usually kept to myself, small regrets, fleeting hopes, and the subtle ache of being so aware of her presence. Our conversation meandered, intimate but safe, and every so often our hands brushed, not intentionally, but with enough frequency to make me aware of the quiet thrill in proximity. The warmth of her hand, the slight tension in her shoulder as she laughed softly, the way her eyes softened when she looked at me, all of it imprinted itself into my memory. By the time I left, the rain had stopped. I stepped back into the hallway, feeling the cool air on my damp skin, yet carrying with me the warmth of that shared vulnerability. Something had shifted. We were no longer just neighbors, just passing figures in each other's routines. Something deeper had begun, a quiet understanding, a budding trust, and the subtle promise of connection that could not be ignored. Days passed after that rainy evening, yet the warmth of her apartment and the quiet intimacy we had shared lingered in my thoughts like a stubborn echo. Our hallway encounters began to carry an unspoken rhythm. Each nod, each casual greeting, each fleeting glance held a subtle electricity, a silent acknowledgement of the bond quietly forming between us. One afternoon, she called me unexpectedly. Her voice, calm and slightly teasing, invited me to help rearrange a bookshelf she'd been struggling with. The task seemed mundane, but I felt a surge of anticipation as I walked into her apartment again, a place that was becoming a space of subtle connection. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, comforting and familiar. As we moved books together, our hands brushed repeatedly. Each accidental touch made my chest tighten and my pulse quicken. I could feel the warmth of her skin lingering against mine, the softness of her fingers, and a shiver of anticipation ran through me each time our hands met. She laughed at my clumsiness when I nearly dropped a stack of books, and the sound was light, melodic, a sound that seemed to wrap around the room and settle in my chest. At one point, she leaned closer to reach a book on a high shelf, and I instinctively stepped nearer. The space between us shrank, and I noticed the subtle scent of her perfume mingling with the faint must of old books. Her eyes flicked to mine, and there was a pause, a tiny, charged moment where everything felt suspended. I felt the quiet pull, a magnetic tension neither of us fully acknowledged but both could feel. Even as we laughed and joked, there was a careful balance in our movements, proximity that teased without crossing boundaries, touches that lingered for a heartbeat longer than necessary, glances that said more than words could. The playful energy between us masked the deeper current of desire building slowly, like a river gaining momentum beneath a calm surface. By the time the bookshelf was arranged, there was a comfortable silence. She stood a little closer than usual, her hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, her gaze lingering on me. I could feel the warmth of her presence settle around me like a soft, persistent weight. It was an intimacy that didn't need words, a connection built through small gestures, shared laughter, and the delicate tension of proximity. As I left that day, I walked down the hallway with a strange mix of exhilaration and restraint. The slow burn between us had intensified, a quiet, playful tension that promised something deeper, something inevitable. And though neither of us had admitted it, both of us knew the rules were shifting, and that every brush of hands, every shared smile, was a step towards something far more profound than either of us had anticipated. The evening was calm, the kind where the air feels heavy with unsaid words and small, suspended moments. She had invited me up to her balcony to watch the sunset, and I could feel my heartbeat quicken even before I stepped onto the warm wooden floor. The city below was bathed in amber light, streets glistening from a recent rain, but all I could notice was the quiet presence beside me. She leaned lightly against the railing, sweater sleeves tugged over her hands, and I stood just a fraction away, close enough to feel her warmth, far enough to respect the invisible line we had been carefully maintaining. The breeze carried the faint scent of her perfume, mixing with the earthy smell of the wet city below, and I felt a shiver run through me that had nothing to do with the evening chill. For a long while, neither of us spoke. The silence was comfortable, yet charged, a delicate tension that pressed gently against my chest. I noticed the subtle tremble in her fingers as she brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The tilt of her head, the soft exhale escaping her lips, every detail was amplified, a symphony of quiet signals I had been learning to read over the past weeks. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, almost hesitant. She shared a memory of a time when she had felt alone, and I caught the vulnerability in her eyes, a crack in the composed, confident exterior she always carried. My hand twitched slightly, the urge to reach out nearly overwhelming. I wanted to brush her hair from her face, to offer some gesture of reassurance, but I held back, respecting the delicate balance of the moment. Instead, I let my gaze linger, feeling the warmth of her eyes meet mine. The pause stretched, heavy with unspoken longing, and I could sense her awareness of it too. Each subtle movement, the way she shifted slightly closer, the faint brush of her sleeve against my arm, communicated what words could not. The connection between us was raw, intimate, yet still restrained, a slow-burn fire that neither of us wanted to rush. As the last light of the sun faded, she turned her face toward me, a quiet acknowledgement passing between us. There was no declaration, no confession, but the look held everything: curiosity, desire, hesitation, and trust. The emotional peak was not a dramatic explosion, but a slow, steady swell, a mutual understanding that the bond between us had deepened far beyond casual acquaintance. Walking back to her door later, I felt the weight of the evening's closeness lingering. Every brush of hands, every lingering glance, every heartbeat had led us to this point, the moment before surrendering fully to the slow, inevitable pull of something far more profound than either of us had anticipated. The days that followed felt different, as if the world had subtly shifted along with us. Our interactions were no longer simply neighborly exchanges, there was an unspoken understanding now, a quiet intimacy that threaded through every glance, every small gesture. The tension that had simmered for weeks softened into something tender and steady, a slow warmth that settled comfortably around us. One evening, I found myself lingering outside her door, hesitating, aware of how close we had grown and yet uncertain how to bridge the final space between familiarity and something deeper. She opened the door before I could knock, her sweater loosely draped over her shoulders, damp hair falling naturally around her face. The soft light from the hallway highlighted the curve of her smile, the faint warmth radiating from her skin. Without a word, she stepped aside, allowing me into her apartment. It smelled faintly of candles and vanilla, a comforting blend that seemed uniquely hers. The air between us was calm yet electric, filled with the accumulated weight of shared glances, fleeting touches, and quiet confessions. We moved toward the living room together, an unspoken rhythm guiding our steps. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and my hand twitched, wanting to reach out. Instead, I stopped a heartbeat away, feeling the warmth of her presence without overstepping. Our eyes met, lingering, and in that look was the sum of everything we had built: trust, curiosity, quiet desire, and the comfort of being understood. Slowly, almost tentatively, she rested her hand against my chest, just above my heart. It was a light touch, gentle and deliberate, and I felt the warmth seep through, grounding me. The softness of her fingers, the steady rhythm of her heartbeat beneath my hand, the quiet strength of her presence, it was all a language without words, intimate and complete. I responded with the smallest motion, leaning slightly closer, and for a fleeting moment our cheeks brushed. It was simple, unassuming, yet it carried all the weight of the weeks we had spent building this connection. Her laugh, soft and melodic, broke the tension, and the room seemed to breathe with us. In that quiet, lingering moment, everything fell into place. The age gap, the hesitation, the social awareness, none of it mattered. What remained was the steady warmth of two people discovering each other, slowly, deliberately, with respect and care. We exchanged a final glance, soft smiles touching our lips, and I knew that this was only the beginning of something lasting. The story didn't end with grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It ended in the quiet affirmation of closeness, the brush of hands, the lingering gaze, the warmth of presence, a slow, fulfilling romance that had arrived exactly where it was meant to. The pull between us had finally become a steady current, carrying us forward together, completely and unreservedly. The pull between us had finally become a steady current, carrying us forward together, completely and unreservedly. If you want to experience the full slow burn journey and see every moment between us unfold, click the link in the description to watch the full story. Don't miss it.